Perfect. Thanks.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is April 10th, 2024, if you can believe that. Who believes that? Yeah, thank you, Dennis, for the head shake. Like, I don't know what happened since Christmas, but here we are. All right, friends. Well, welcome. We have got a 2-hour meeting ahead of us, and I am going to start with our roll call, and then we will move into the meeting minutes. And first, I just have to say good morning, Elizabeth. It's good to see you. All right. I will start with Kelly Abbott. Norma.
I'm here. Sorry, I'm still driving, but I will be on camera soon.
We're glad to have you, Norma. Michelle Bradley. We actually have a single screen here today. I don't see you. Ashley Chase, not here. Anna Cole. Ah, there she is.
Just made it.
Just made it. Perfect. Welcome. Jenna.
Hi there.
Hi, Jenna. Brian Cotter just emailed me. He will be 30 minutes late, but he is coming. Dennis.
I'm here. Hi.
Good morning, Dennis. Janelle.
I'm here and I'm not turning on my camera because I feel like death.
Okay, well, we hope you feel better, but thank you for being here. Dave Hayes. I thought I saw him. Chelsea. Chelsea, I see your name. I'm going to assume.
Sorry, I'm here. I just couldn't figure out how to unmute.
No worries. Kevin Lash, I saw you. Dave Lee.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here.
Good morning, Renee.
Good morning.
I knew I saw you. Beth.
Good morning.
Hello, Beth. Brandon.
Brandon is going to be in and out of the meeting today, but if we text him, if we need him immediately, he'll pop in.
Are you kidding? We always need Brandon. Start texting. Becky, you're next on the list. You're here. Good morning. Elizabeth, I said hello. Hi. Lynette.
I'm here.
Good morning, Lynette. Timothy. I'm here. And Jana.
Here.
Hi, Jana. Did I forget anybody that I did not call? It looks like I got everybody. Okay, great. Moving on to our March 6th, 2024 meeting materials. I'm going to start with the meeting minutes first and then move to our meeting recap. Has everybody had a chance, just a show of hands, to review these documents? They were sent to you in advance of the meeting. Yes, fantastic. Focusing on the meeting minutes, are there any corrections that need to be made to that document? All right, seeing none, if I could have a motion and a second to approve those meeting minutes from March 6th.
This is Jenna. I can approve.
Okay, so Jen can approve and then I'll second.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Any further discussion? All right. Anybody who is opposed to the approval of those March 6th, 2024 meeting minutes? All right, I see no hands. Those will pass. Moving on to the March 6th, 2024 meeting recap. Again, this is just a deeper summary of the meeting, if you will. That's got a lot more detail than our meeting minutes. Any corrections that need to be made to that document? All right. Again, if I could have a motion and a second to approve that document.
This is Norma Aguilar Dave, and I make a motion to approve it.
Thanks, Norma.
Kevin seconds.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Is there anybody who is opposed to approval of that March 6th meeting recap? All right. I see none. Thank you all. Efficient as always. Trace, I believe that concludes my work here.
Perfect. Thanks. Morning, all. Thanks for being here. Like Stephanie said, we have a 2-hour meeting ahead of us. I want to start real quick with our roadmap just to remind us where we are, and then I'll get us in our groups. as quickly as it can. So just as a reminder, we're back in our subcommittee groups today. Intervention with Doris will be working on temporary placement policies and procedures. Prevention group with me will be on the restraints piece and the clarity of the laws it's written. We'll then come back May 1st for the full group, where folks will be from those subcommittees bringing back any sort of language or recommendations for the full group to discuss. Back in subcommittees in June, full group review in July, and then August and September we're really setting aside for the finalization of the report. We do know, as we mentioned in the last meeting, that we're going to be adding 2 meetings. And Jordan, I know you might want to reference that, but I do want to bring in Jordan real quick just to talk about where we are, because one of those meetings is around the survey that we had all talked about. So just what the update is there. And then if you just want to reference the other meeting, we haven't sent those dates out yet, but we will be doing that shortly. So just wanted to remind folks. But Jordan, I'll go ahead and bring you in and just to hear the update on where things are so we can get those meetings planned, and then we'll go from there.
Great, thanks, Trace. So as Trace mentioned, and as we discussed during our last meeting, we're working to get a survey together to send out to facilities in the state. So just want to give a huge thank you to Becky and Brandon, who I know sat together and came up with some questions and kind of gave us a framework for what that survey is going to look like. We've created that survey. We're just waiting on just a few more details before we get it out, but I think it'll go out by the end of this week. So what we need to do in terms of planning additional meetings, we have to plan 2. One would be to review the results of that survey and figure out how we want to incorporate both in some of the discussions we've reviewed in the past and some that we'll be moving forward into. And then we need to schedule a second meeting really to address the parameters of this task force's enabling statute, which does require us to consider all the recommendations we've made presently in that lens of facilities and how potentially we may want to be applying them to foster homes. Because as I'm sure all of you know, our statute actually requires us to consider those placements as well. And we've been very facility focused, and we want to give dedicated time to kind of going through our discussions and thinking about how, if we want to issue those recommendations in a manner that would better suit foster homes and foster placements, how we can do that. So those are the 2 meetings. I anticipate they're both going to be 3 hours, just given the nature. As Trace has previously said, we're pretty booked up on Wednesday mornings moving forward. So I don't think they're going to be on Wednesday mornings, but we'll get those out as soon as we can. And then Trace did send out, just so everyone knows, the rescheduled meeting in July, because I'm sure none of us wanted to meet on July 3rd. Trace, did I forget anything?
I believe that's it. Any questions from folks? All right, cool. Well, let's get into our groups again. We're wanting to keep with our same group. So if you've been with Doris, stick with Doris. And if you've been with me, stick with me. We're going to go into our breakout groups. We are in those. Doris, let's do until 9:45 and then come back. And if y'all finish early, just let us know as well. You could come back into the main room. Well, actually you'd stick in your group, but Jordan's gonna drop a link. That will be Doris's group that's going to jump into that link and move over. So just give it a minute or 2 for folks to go start that link and then to join there. And then we'll see you back in the main room to close up and make sure we do public comment. And then we'll close the meeting out. Anything else, Doris or Jordan?
I know, I think we have one member of the public, Mr. Fisher, who's welcome to go to whichever group he.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, so if you are a member of the public on the call, Mr. Fisher, thanks for being here. You're welcome to stick here. We're going to be talking about use of restraint in this group, and the other group is talking about temporary placements. So feel free to stick in this group or click the link in the chat and head to the other group to listen in. Either way, we'll have opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting. Okay. All right. So if you were with Doris, go ahead and click into that link and we'll see you back here in a bit. And Jordan, maybe, I know you're hopping over there to begin with, maybe just make sure that you're recording over there.
Trace, your host here, so I'll hop over and then I'll come back.
All right, cool.
Should I stay in this group since Brandon isn't here today and there's not a provider? I don't think a provider in here.
That would be my preference.
Okay, I would love to if I could.
I
All right.
must have missed the link somehow. Where's the link?
It's in the chat, I believe, Kevin.
Oh, chat. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. There we go.
Hello, Steve Fisher.
All right. All right, let's get going. Morning, everybody. Thanks for being here, and appreciate the folks that were able to respond to the survey. I think we've got an interesting conversation ahead of us for a variety of reasons, one of which is that there's not one clear theme in the way that folks responded to this survey. So I'm going to actually bring up the survey results so you can kind of all see where folks are at. I didn't attribute it by name to anyone just because I wanted folks to feel like they could jump in and just have a conversation around where things are. But again, talking about the clarity of the use of restraints, and I want to go ahead and bring up, give me 1 second. All right, cool. So just as a reminder, so this is what the directive calls for us to do as a group. And I can't see also if anybody like wants to jump in or cut me off, just jump on and say so. This was the directive as it's written. So just wanted to remind folks of kind of what we're getting at. So analyze the comprehensiveness and effectiveness of existing state laws and regulations and placement facility protocols to respond to a child's threat to run away from out-of-home placement and for promptly reporting, locating, evaluating, and treating children who have run away. The question for today, based on the conversation we had on March 1st and kind of like where we heard folks interested in going, this is kind of how we came up with this question is, does Colorado law currently provide enough clarity regarding what constitutes an emergency situation in which physical restraint is appropriate? So the conversation being held through the lens of whether law is effective in preventing children and youth from running away from out of home care. Also just wanted to bring in the definition currently that states that a facility may only use physical restraint in cases of emergency. This is what's currently written. The current definition of emergency is defined as meaning a serious, probable, imminent threat of bodily harm to self or others where there is the present ability to affect such bodily harm. And I'm going to drop these slides in the chat in just a little bit so you all can reference them as we're having a conversation. Just going through the survey results just so you all can kind of know where we are. So we asked first, does Colorado law, which I just talked through, provide the necessary clarity regarding what constitutes an emergency situation in which physical restraint is appropriate? The difference between 57 and 42% is one person. So pretty 50-50 split on yes and no with a little bit of edge to no, not providing the necessary clarity. Here are the comments. Just want to give you all a minute to read through these. These are the additional comments that you all provided in response to that question. So just take a minute to review. I'd say the one theme that I see is that everybody agrees that it's vague. It feels like the split is around whether it should be vague or not. So it does seem like we're all like agreeing that of where it is on the altitude of like vague or clear. And some people are saying, you know, understand it needs to be to encompass many different situations and the ambiguity of, you know, the actual situation that might be happening on the ground and for the call to be made at the residential level and by the professional dealing with the situation. And then some people are saying, yes, it's vague, and we think that there could be additional examples given. I'm seeing the example of like considerations around age, maturity, medical health, psychological well-being. So is there an opportunity to define further criteria that would be included there? So gonna move to the next question. There's obviously a lot more kind of cohesion here. As currently drafted, is Colorado law regarding the use of restraints effective at preventing children and youth from running away from out-of-home care? And the majority of you said no, that the way that it is currently written is not seen as effective in the actual prevention. Take a minute to review the responses to that question. All right, and then moving on, I want y'all to, these are just the additional comments that were made from a couple of members. So please just read these real quick. I think this is where one particular ask is made around, the clarity of the law being fine, but what would it look like to pursue a robust statewide training for all facilities so that staff are clear and consistent on what warrants an emergency? Let's take just a minute to review the additional comments, and then I just want to bring it back full group. All right. I'm going to drop in these slides if it's helpful for you all. Give me 1 second. So you can just kind of reference back to the language piece. So let's get into it. I think it's again, the word I want to underscore is the analyze, right? So this is what the directive is asking us to do is really analyze the comprehensiveness and effectiveness as the law as it's currently written. So just want to remind us of that word analyze, because I do think that's important as to like where we get as a group. So, with the question of, does Colorado law currently provide enough clarity regarding what constitutes an emergency situation? Want to get into this kind of first question around, does it provide the necessary clarity? Everyone's like, listen, it's vague and that's for a good reason, and it's vague and it needs to be more clear. I want to just kind of open it up to the group for folks that on the vague and it should stay vague, like as it's currently written, and let's actually focus on the training piece. Would love to just kind of open that up to that particular perspective first, and then let's bring in the folks that are like, yes, it's vague, and also I think there's opportunity to include more examples, etc. So would love to hear from folks first that are like, I think it's good as it's written because it needs to be. Want to hear a little bit more context from your perspective, your thinking on that.
Can we just pop in, Trace? Is that okay?
Yeah, please. Yeah, of course. Just jump in.
If Brandon were here, I can hear his voice in my head, but I know what he would say. The word that we get hung up on is imminent. And so it's when folks come out from the state from licensing and monitoring, and a kiddo has been on the run, they talk about imminent risk or imminent danger. And so Brandon Southern Peaks has paid a very reputable law firm a ton of money to try to help define imminent and what that means. And if Dennis were on the screen, he would talk about this too. There are differences in the definition. For example, if the kid is going to climb a wall and jump across the wall and leave, does it become imminent when the kiddo threatens to do that, or when they're scaling up the wall, or when the first foot leaves the wall? Like, there is a lot of sort of room for differences of opinion in that discussion. And so that's a piece of it that I think is sort of, well, if Brandon were here, I think he would say that's one of the bullseye pieces of the conversation.
And Becky, can I just make sure I'm understanding? So, and from your perspective, the imminent is too broad and that's problematic. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would say that.
Because it leaves it up to just too much interpretation, and then folks feel, is there the interpretation, is the problem on the side where then it just like causes folks on the ground to like not act because they're too concerned, or that they have acted and they've gotten in hot water, or is it more just everyone's then like, we're not going to do anything because we don't know what imminent actually means?
It's all of that. It's that they have acted and gotten in hot water, and they're different. They get in trouble sometimes for certain things and not others, depending on who's interpreting it. It's from CDHS. So yes, it's everything you just said, Trace.
Okay. So then from the perspective of you and or speaking for Brandon, knowing kind of like what his experience has been, is the request there really for, honing in on that piece of like, would you all recommend that it be written more clearly, or that the training be more defined and clear, and that there be sort of a statement around what imminent means? Like, does the law need to actually, like, I'm just trying to get at like, so then what,
Yeah, no, you're right. And I know you want me to say more clearly than just yes, all of that. But yes, change it in law, I think would be helpful. Yes, changing for more clarity and training would be helpful. The other piece that Kevin would also say would be, and Brandon too, is what comes down to what can we do to stop kids from running? Can we put hands on them? Can we, the parents who've been in this discussion have very clearly said, yes, I want you to put hands on my kid and stop them from running. And so I do think some more clarity is needed around what specifically we can do.
I look at this stuff and all I think about, if I was a provider or a residential provider or even a foster home parent, all I think about when I read this is liability.
Absolutely.
Is what's going to happen when we put our hands on a youth and somebody gets hurt? Where's the liability? And so if you ask for clarity, it's like, yeah, it gives a definition of emergency, but what does all the other stuff mean? What is the definition of imminent? I mean, those are the things that I would worry about if I was a provider. I mean, those are the things that we deal with within Division of Youth Services, within our youth centers, is the interpretation of imminent from one staff member to another staff member. Even though we've gone through all kinds of training on what that particular means, it's those spur of the moment, split second decisions you make, and what staff believe is an emergency or not. It worries me.
Yeah, I'm coming from, and again, I do foster care, so that is part of my perspective here. But the reason I like the vague is because, like, so we use volume 7, right? That's our Bible. And when bad things happen, it is vague that we can share very clearly all the steps that we took. And for the most part, they can see like you acted in good faith, and this is why you did this, right? And so part of me thinks that whoever said acting in good faith, can that protection be there? Because I think imminent does have to be self-defined by the provider in the situation. Like, Becky, I worry about if we get so detailed, when their foot leaves the ground, 3 witnesses are going to be like, say 3 different things, right? So what really happened? But they can all say like, yeah, it was imminent. They were heading for the wall, or whatever the case may be. So I worry getting too specific, because we don't have that in volume 7. On some things we do, but on a lot of things we don't. And that leaves it for us to be able to say, this is why we acted this way in good faith to keep this child safe.
I think that's that kind of brilliant point. I think you're 200% on. And I think the more prescriptive we get, the more there will be to argue over and misinterpret, exactly like you say. But I love the idea of talking about in good faith and maybe doing a deeper dive into what that means. And, I think that's a great point, Jenna.
I'll jump in here. I think this is a really tough question. I think there are major problems with making a law more prescriptive, like you all were just saying, and just want to compare this to, for example, statutes around putting someone on an involuntary psychiatric hold, for medical interventions when there's an emergency, things like that. They all have similar language, and there's a reason for that, because it is so hard to make it prescriptive. And so I think that would be a tough way to go. All of these things, though, are open to interpretation. When someone is putting someone on a hold, someone might say, well, they must not be at imminent risk because they are saying currently they're not suicidal, but there might be a whole body of knowledge around, well, we know they've been actively trying to kill themselves and they say they're not in the moment, and things like that. And so someone makes a determination, that there's imminent risk, whereas someone else might, be interpreting something very concretely and narrowly, and that wouldn't be necessarily the best clinical interpretation. So I will own that my department are the ones who interpret and enforce this, and that's really where the most wiggle room is. Certainly training on the other side is important too, on the provider side. I think there is some, I wish Dennis were here, but I think there is also some different providers have had different experiences with the licensing and regulatory agencies and might have had different takeaways also. So even with nothing changing right now, I think there's different interpretations at different sites, but I do think that's where the wiggle room is in the interpretation. There's also the piece of it that on the provider side, documentation, and really being able to demonstrate the why for things is huge in terms of if one is worried about consequences, et cetera. There's also other models too, and so I think some sites within our state have at times done something where they've documented ahead of time about someone who they know, based on the assessment of that youth, would be at risk just by setting foot outside the door, regardless of what things look like in the moment, and having documentation, ahead of time that delineates, kind of like the risk assessments we've talked about. In some states do that actually, and have certain kids who are like sort of an order on the books that someone who, because of their risk level, hands can go on earlier versus someone else who's not deemed to be so high risk, because they're trying to do the thinking ahead of time about what does imminent risk mean for each kid. So yeah, I think to me, the law is not where the problem is, and changes to how it's acted upon would come elsewhere.
So if I had just looking at reading this CRS 2620-103, I mean, physical restraint in case of emergency. I mean, if this group truly is going to recommend the use of physical restraint when it comes to people running away, I think that specifically needs to be added into the law, as in, because when I look at an emergency, when I read that, a kid running away is not an emergency. It just isn't. It's not a reason to restrain somebody, to put physical hands on somebody. Because, I mean, I look at a kid running away, that doesn't mean there's serious, probable, imminent threat of bodily harm. It doesn't mean that at all. Just because a kid decides going, I'm out of here, I'm going, and they can literally walk away. That is not an emergency according to this definition.
Well, and Dave, I'm wondering if the example that someone gave around then clarifying what might be an imminent threat to a child running away, because a 17-year-old running away versus a 12-year-old versus a 7-year-old, right? Is there opportunity to clarify what parts would make it imminent based on someone listed out, age, medical condition, psychological well-being, those sorts of things as examples that would feed into what makes something imminent, right? Because you're saying, from a provider perspective, a person who, so a kid who is known to to run and go to the corner and, you know, like blow off some steam and then walk back, and this is just part of the routine, versus a kid who's, you know, got other risk factors going on with their running. Is that kind of, would that be the difference for you? Or I'm just thinking about, I'm not sure who wrote that, so I'm just bringing that up as.
See, I look at it going, when I read this definition, it doesn't matter what their past behaviors are. It means imminent, the here and now. I mean, they can have all kinds of runaway behaviors, poor behavior, risky behaviors that could put themselves in harm, but that's not imminent. That's in the past. What providers look at is the here and now, what's happening, because that's how we have to document. Stephanie, you know that when we talk about the ombudsman office, we have to describe this in the here and now. Is it imminent right now? And if it isn't, it doesn't matter what the behavior was 6 months ago or even a month ago. It's right now.
Yeah, Dave, I think that is where there is some room for interpretation. I think if that's the way the culture has been interpreting it, then yes, what you're saying, that would be then, you know, how it's acted upon. But again, just comparing to like an M1 hold, and it's really the same language. And someone could be as calm as a cucumber in the moment and showing no sign of distress, but still could be put on an M1 hold based on the circumstances, you know, around the situation, that, you know, the determination was that no, they actually are at imminent risk, even though right here in this moment they may not be doing something. So I agree with you that could absolutely be how things are interpreted, but imminent in both psychiatric world and the medical world does allow taking into account other factors. So I think there is a fair amount of a gray area, and it comes down to you know, how it can be defined. And it sounds like in DYS the imminent is taken in a much more narrow way, but there are similar contexts where, you know, imminent is defined more broadly. So I think it doesn't automatically limit the assessment, you know, hugely.
Stephanie, I want to bring you in. I know you've had your hand up patiently. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Trace. Yeah, I agree with so much of what has been said today. And I think a few thoughts. I agree. Right, we can't get so prescriptive. There'll never be an answer, right? It's a little bit like removing children from, you know, their parents, right? Like what one caseworker deems is appropriate is not what another would, right? So at the end of the day, we can never get that prescriptive. But what I would say is that I definitely know there is a huge gulf between the law and what facilities do and perceive the law to be. Becky and I have been part of really robust conversations with the entire CAFCA group many times. And there is a massive gap. So at a minimum, I think that an argument could be made for, you know, a standard sort of statewide training about what is a restraint, how is the best way to perform that restraint, right? Considerations that one may have before performing that. Because right now there's just not that guidance. And you even saw this, everyone who's read the Colorado Sun articles regarding Timmy. I mean, you had the state saying we can't lay hands on kids, right? Or, you know, they have rights, which they do. But you also had staff going, we can't lay hands on these kids. And I'd be like, no, that's not what the law actually says. You can under certain circumstances. So we have seen this play out for decades. And so I do think at a minimum, there's a place for training. What I did want to add, because I know training can be such an unsatisfactory response to these things, but how
There's federal funding.
Oh, somebody is talking.
You're good. Keep going. Yeah.
Okay. What I did want to add is that House Bill 24-1038 is actually contemplating creation of a training academy for residential care staff. That bill has moved through and is now sitting in appropriations. It's a CDHS bill, Renee. I know you're aware of it. And so by way of saying, I think, first of all, it's a brilliant idea. And secondly, this could be an area that the task force recognizes, that this bill could pass. There could be a training academy for staff. And oops, Norma's trying to get back somehow. But this could be an area where staff could be trained, right? And uniformly so. So I just wanted to highlight that particular activity before we move on, that is currently going on. And sorry, I had one other thing I wanted to say, and of course my internet went out and has wiped out everything. Oh yeah, and then I just wanted to support, Renee, as I was reading the minutes before the meeting today, Sergeant Cotter hit on exactly this notion of pre-planning, right? Like if we really work to assess our youth early on, right? And we really come to conclusions about who is a run risk than others, that certainly would provide the guidance in advance, right, Becky, before somebody's on site going, what do I do? They would at least hopefully have access to a case file that said, we did an assessment and this child's run 10 times before. They're 11 years old and they have medical concerns. So yeah, if they start to head towards the door, that would constitute an emergency. So I just wanted to support Renee's thinking on that. Jenna, I think you said similar thoughts as well. I think this is all part and parcel of our entire conversation as a task force. That if we were to do A and B up front, I think that this notion of restraints could not only become clear, but would be less needed, potentially.
Totally agree. Well put, Stephanie.
Oh, last thing, Trace, I did want to point out, I was looking at Wyoming's policies. Brian sent us a brief back on November 1. And Jordan, I think you can put that in the chat, where he did walk through some states' restraint definitions and policy. And I just wanted to point out Wyoming's policies, and I'll read it a bit until we can get it in the chat. But, it was an interesting language. The purpose of physical restraint shall be to provide only that degree of physical control that the child is unwilling or unable to provide for him or herself. I thought it was interesting, for lack of a better word. It definitely would illustrate that the person wanting to restrain, that there is a continuum of care that must be given here, and that one size doesn't fit all. I thought that was interesting. I also thought it was interesting. It said, shall ensure the child is released from a restraint as soon as the child gains control. I thought that was super interesting. And it also said, you also can't have an application of a restraint if a child has a documented physical or mental health condition that would contradict its use. I think that's super interesting, right? So there are states that have gone a little deeper without telling the user of the restraint what to do, has certainly provided a little bit more clarity about the degree of restraint, as well as those cases in which restraint should not even be used. So I do think that there's room for further discussion on that as well. And yeah, Jordan, that bill was House Bill 241038. It's part of the high acuity crisis bill.
Well, and Stephanie, I think you're bringing up, so this particular thing, what was the state you said, Wyoming?
Wyoming.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear from other folks if that sort of, those examples are examples that because I'm hearing from folks around, it feels like, I mean, Renee, I heard you say, I don't think the issue is in the law, and it seems like everyone is coalescing around this idea that the law is vague though. So is there opportunity to get a little bit more clear in a recommendation around the law as it's currently written? And in addition to, this broader piece around the training component, and however we'd have to discuss that further. But I kind of want to open it up to the example of like a Wyoming where there's 2 or 3 things spelled out in addition to as the law is currently written. What do folks think about that? Do you need a minute to kind of review that? It's the first link that Jordan dropped in, but would love to hear kind of initial reactions to that.
Trace, just before I leave, I did want to comment on Jenna's recommendation about sort of good faith. That isn't anywhere in our law. And I've seen that language in a lot of statutes over my life. And I think there's something to be said, right? Is that you act in good faith, and good faith is that you have a reasonable belief that a child isn't harmed. Like, I think that there's some language that maybe we could add that would be supportive, but again, doesn't dictate per se the actions that must be taken, but maybe gives providers additional support.
So I would add that maybe then to the list of clarifications, right? So like the reasonable belief, and then the examples from Wyoming as well. Like, are there examples? Renee, I'd seen you kind of come in and curious, like your thoughts.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, those things I think wouldn't be unreasonable to consider. I just wanted to mention, I think another place to put clarification is in policy and rule and things like that. And I think sometimes that can be, that could be a better choice. So just wanted to, mention that clarifying things can go in other places too. And, there might be pros and cons to where you put that. Sometimes it does feel helpful to try not to be too prescriptive in the law, but I think those are reasonable things to consider.
Yeah, I like those pieces within Wyoming's policy or law. That kind of continuum of care, which you had said, Stephanie, for, kind of levels of restraining. And then, as soon as that child is showing control of themselves, getting hands off. So they're not, because you do hear, people are sitting in restraints for hours, right? And that's when really bad things happen. So I think something like that would be important to make sure that you don't have kids in long-term pieces or long-term holds that don't need to be in long-term holds. So I actually like some of those pieces from Wyoming.
All right, so here's what I want to do. I've got some note catchers for us because I think what I would like to see is where some themes come in across suggested. So this idea of any additional clarification sounds like the folks like Renee, you saying like it could potentially be better placed in policy, but you're open to this idea. I want to get some like concrete, using the example from Wyoming, using your own ideas that you kind of heard here today around the good faith, or however you said it, Jenna, better than I just did. Want to get some things written down because I think we could start to see where some themes are. So I'm going to share this link real quick and you'll see your name in a specific note catcher. And let's focus on this first question. Give me 1 second. Let me drop this link in. Go in and find your note catcher with your name. And now I'm actually wondering if
Trace, I'm just seeing one template. Do you want me to go in and create some individual note catchers while you kind of...
No, you should just need to refresh it. They're in there. Did it work? No? Hold on. Try that link right there. I'm seeing all of them on my end.
Yeah, it works for me too.
Did that second link work? Okay. I don't know. All right, so click on that second link and click into your note catcher. And the first question around your note catcher is, what specific language would you suggest to provide additional clarity regarding what constitutes an emergency situation and which physical restraint is appropriate? I think that's the, Stephanie, go ahead, jump in.
No, I'm just not, I've been denied. I have no special note catcher for me.
Your name's not in there, or?
No, I'm feeling very sad and excluded.
Here, let me change. I got you.
Now it should be. I just did it.
Okay, just refresh it, Stephanie. Refresh that page.
I didn't know, Stephanie. You're like the guest of honor always. I was like, she should get like her own special super duper note catcher.
Not only that, my name is spelled wrong if I truly am.
Oh man.
Just saying.
Addie, you're killing me. All right, we'll get it fixed, Stephanie, but you got yours. You're in
I'm
there.
in.
All right,
I'm
cool,
good.
cool, cool. All right, no, we're all good. We're all good. Okay, so let's just take a few minutes, because I think what would be helpful is we're kind of batting around some ideas, different ideas, and I really want to just see where folks are at. And again, you might vote against there being additional language here, but if there were to be, and if there were to be addition, what do you see is appropriate? And if you're just like, that's not where I'm at, that's okay too. Just write that in there. I just want to understand kind of individually where folks are at, and if we can pull out some themes when we do some writing for recommendations. So let's spend 5 minutes on this first question. Again, I think you've got the Wyoming example and just kind of the conversation that we just had. Stephanie, what were the buckets again that you listed out? It was around, I think maybe it was in the Wyoming example.
It was, and basically what it was one, it talked about, is this what you're asking, Trace? The degree of physical control that can be used?
Yeah, just the examples that were given.
Yeah, it was the degree of physical control that can be used from a child's perspective, which I actually really appreciated. They're taking it from a youth's perspective. And then the second bucket was about when we release a child from a restraint, which again, it says as soon as a child gains control. The third was circumstances in which a restraint should not be used. And that would be if there's been a documented condition that contradicts its use. And then there's a training component as well. So I think there's 4 elements to Wyoming that I'm intrigued by.
Yeah.
And by the way, I want to support Renee's thought about Reagan rule is oftentimes a great place to do these things too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, Renee, even if I think the examples here, then we can have the conversation around the where, whether it's in the reflection of the law or in the policies, procedures piece, but then we can at least kind of see what folks are interested in spelling out. So, all right, let's take 5 minutes. I'm gonna be quiet. We'll come back right at 9, and see where folks are. Chelsea, are you able to access yours? I'm not seeing you in there, so just making sure you're good.
I am able to access it. I'm on my phone. I'm trying to figure out how to use my Google Drive app so I can write in it. So that's the part I haven't got
Gotcha.
into yet.
Okay.
So I'm working on it though.
Okay, all good, all good.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
Trace, I all of a sudden have lost my ability to get in there. But I guess I've talked enough, so maybe Addie will just remember what I said.
Trace, I'm having trouble because of the type of app I'm on. Also, could I be a real pain and ask you to email the link?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
I don't know why I can't open anything anymore.
Stephanie, I would just refresh that page because it looks like you should have access. Anybody with the link should have access.
I know, I agree.
Nay, I'm sending you to your specific no catcher. See if that works for you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know why. It's all right. I know where you live.
At the risk of sounding like the dinosaur that I am, do we like need to save this or submit it or do anything with it, Trace, or just like write it and leave it alone?
Just write it and leave it alone.
Let me get back to my game of Pong.
That's a cute question, Becky.
But see, I felt safe enough to ask it in front of all of you.
Right. Psychological safety is important.
It is.
Well, Becky, you're ahead of me. I can't even find my survey anymore. It has disappeared and I keep hitting the chat link and it's not working. So
Stephanie, I'm gonna drop in a different link for you, see if it works. Y'all are something.
Oh man, it's hard getting old.
I can see you in there. That's the funny thing.
I know. I just don't know why I can't see me.
All right, Stephanie, I'm gonna drop in. This is your link.
Your own special link, Stephanie.
See if that works. It's in the chat.
Yeah, I'm clicking it and nothing is opening. It's very bizarre now.
All right, we'll come back to you. You just keep talking.
All right.
I don't know what to do for you.
I know. I don't know what to do with me either. I'm gonna be quiet for a little bit.
Kelly, I don't see you are you able to access yours?
I am, but I'm driving.
Ah, okay. All right, no worries.
But when I'm at a point, I'll fill it in when I can.
I was gonna say if you could do it later, because I'm very interested to hear your perspective on this and get some.
Okay.
I think you've got a unique voice, obviously, to this conversation to contribute. So if you later have some time, that'd be great.
Yes, when I stop, I will fill it in.
Cool. Appreciate you.
Thanks.
Take like one more minute. All right. Let's do a quick just poll here, informal, not a formal vote. This idea around a recommendation that the law itself not being, hold on a second. Let me make sure I'm asking this the right way. Okay, let me actually just make sure I'm understanding. So Stephanie and Renee, I want to pick on y'all just from a facilitation side. So this idea that it not be written in, that the changes not be at the law level, but more in the policy regs and piece. What does that actually mean? Like what, so this group would make a recommendation around that? Like what is that? Because I'm seeing, I think that there's some meat to that based on what other people are saying, but let's just like put on the table what that would actually mean and how that would actually get at kind of like, because I'm trying to make sure the Becky Brandon voice is obviously a huge one here. And so it's like, we need something more, right? That supports providers. And Renee and then Stephanie, you're kind of interested in it around, yes, we agree with that, but we don't know that it needs to be in law. Like, I think there's something there for us to potentially agree on, it sounds like, but I just want to get clear on what that is and what that would look like, and that we're not just kicking the can down the road, maybe on the, so yeah, could y'all give a little bit more, like, what could that be? What could that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the key distinction is that the law is the law, right? It is binding, it is easier to access for people, and it's the law, right? Versus regs and rules are really guidelines, is how I look at them. And so, you know, they are the areas where practice concerns are addressed, right, in greater detail. So one has the binding effect of law, one does not. And so, I mean, I could argue this either way, frankly. I personally always like things being in the law, because in my experience of many, many years, people don't always turn to regulation. They don't know what exists in regulation, and it's also non-binding. So, you know, there's that. And I would say that's the primary distinction. So really, I think it's a question of, do we need our laws to reflect anything additional up front? Where that prominence, if you will, can be recognized, versus regs, which tend to just be, you know, again, still stakeholder trace. They go to state board, they still would be approved, but you know, it's just a degree of education and a degree of prominence. That's what I would say. But that is a critical question here.
Renee, anything to add there as far as like your,
Yeah, I guess one just very small thing, you know, I'm also thinking, like you were just pointing out, Stephanie, rules and regs, you know, maybe a stakeholder and have a separate board. There's also, you know, policy, which doesn't necessarily have the same process. So, I mean, there's pros and cons to them all, but just thinking through different avenues. I mean, I think a lot of these things are in, you know, in various jurisdictions and in similar scenarios, again, for involuntary holds and for medical emergencies, are kind of more at the interpretation and policy level, which again has pros and cons. So acknowledge that.
Becky, from your perspective and thinking through the provider lens, like, does that matter to you? Like, what is the difference between the two? Because what I want to do is like, let's make a decision point around, we talking about the law piece or I'm just going to call it like regulation piece. And then let's work squarely in that bucket. But just kind of curious your perspective as you hear people kind of wrestling between the two.
I'm wrestling too. I think that I lean to the side of law for clarity's sake, so that we're all on the same page. I think that, yeah, I think I like the binding piece of it. If it works in our favor, I guess. I don't know how to say it any better than that. I think that I put in one of my comments in the little Google thing that we were doing. However we write this, I want to give professional discretion to providers, because I think that a lot of times the way that they're monitored doesn't feel that way. Anyway, I don't know. I have to sit with it longer, Trace. I would love to hear what Brandon would say too.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if there's a middle ground here where there is some additional clarification recommended on the law side, recognizing that will not be capturing all of the nuances, Becky, that like a provider would want to see. And that's more in the like policy, you know, regulation side. It's like maybe it's not either or, it's both and a little bit here, where Renee, to your point, it's like maybe there's an opportunity for some clarification that leads us more strongly in the direction of these like rules and regulations playing a prominent role, and it's all more spelled out at a detailed level there. But the law is a little bit more clear, it sounds like Becky would be.
I'm going to lean more toward law, and I'm going to just say, with the caveat that the providers are at the table helping with any changes that we even consider around law.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Trace, if I could jump in, I think you are correct. It can be an and both. And here's what I mean. The reality is, if you have a new idea, so let's just say we decide to have a good faith exception that providers can use. That is a new idea. That is a concept that would go into law, whereas rule really is designed to interpret law. So I could see where it would say good faith exception is a brand new thing, or even in certain circumstances, there should never be a restraint issued regarding certain categories of children. To me, those are new ideas, those are laws. What would become a rule, on the other hand, would be you should release a child, the moment they can gain sufficient control over their physical or behavioral health actions. That's an interpretation, right? And so the reality is that is typically how one distinguishes. To be honest, it's all very muddy because people, they don't make the distinction. But anything that is new that would create a new standard of practice would be a law issue. Anything that interprets that would go into the other category.
I would potentially be interested in, and there may not be time for this, but hearing from the providers and the regulators in some place like Wyoming, and also similar input from states who have similar laws to ours, but have more defined internal policies or processes for kind of carrying out these things to help inform this. I mean, I feel like this discussion is useful in raising ideas, but I don't feel like this group today will, would be able to come to a fully informed, recommendation about which would be the best avenue to go. I think and maybe there's not only one correct way or one best way. There might be multiple, but it seems like
I think Renee, like the thing I'd pull us back to just in response to that, sorry, I wasn't trying to cut you off, is this idea of like analysis, right? Where this is the recommendation here is that the directive is written around the analysis of the clarity, and clearly the fact that we're all kind of, right. I do think there's some things here that we could kind of coalesce around. That's not saying here's the law should be rewritten and here's how. It's more that the analysis of if it is clear enough, right? So just want to say that I do think that we're further along in as far as the analysis piece goes, and where a recommendation would be that we're not recommending exactly what it state, but more and Jordan, just a clarity on like what something could look like based on this conversation and as it relates to the directive, because I think that maybe we're in a better spot than it could feel.
I would agree with that, because we put this in the survey slightly. We're not really interpreting the directive we have in the statute to give us that authority to go down deep to that level of it shall include, and here's the points, boom, 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 boom. We're taking it to that high level, which the language is actually, is it clear? Is it comprehensive, and does it need to be addressed? So I would agree with Trace that we're further along. We can always take it to the point of, say, it needs clarity on these 6 points, or we could consider, what is the actual interpretation? I do think we're further along. I don't think we need to go down to that minute level. I think that can come in future stakeholdering if we wanted it to.
That all makes sense. That's helpful for you to reframe it like that way. I think maybe then to me it would kind of come down to a conclusion that I think it's hard to say that the law isn't clear enough, because clearly there's other ways to work that out, and other places have done that. But it seems very clear that for providers in the state trying to work with this law, that there is a problem with the whole process. So it feels like, there could be a recommendation that there needs to be clarity, and there needs to be a next step, for achieving that, without it necessarily concluding that clarity has to be within the law. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense on my end. I'm curious what folks, the differentiation there. Stephanie, want to jump in? And then I want to ask a question around this good faith thing, because that does seem to be a theme of like, could there also be a recommendation around how either in law or, rules reg, a strong recommendation around what it looks like to better support providers in this, something around them having professional discretion, whether we call it good faith or whatever, because that feels like a kind of a strong ask, Becky, from you. So I just want to like bring that up as maybe a specific thing in addition to this kind of broader recommendation and analysis of the clarity piece, that there might be an opportunity for there to be a spelled out recommendation around how are we supporting providers to be the professionals that they are. I'm just looking at like people's notes. It looks like everyone's kind of interested, or most people. I would be curious if anyone's not interested in this kind of good faith idea being a recommendation and where that would live. But Stephanie, jump in. No, I don't want to take us down that rabbit hole yet. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Teresa, what do you want me to jump in on? I have a gazillion thoughts.
Yeah, I think you were coming in response to Renee's piece and what we were kind of wrestling with there.
Yeah, I think that the way you and Jordan have articulated it is correct, right? Is that there could be clarity around restraints generally, right? And clarity could be articulated in the following 4 areas. I want to be cautious though, and not have such a high level recommendation that it doesn't get acted upon. So my personal preference is to always provide examples, from other states or from other places. And that's where, Renee, I agree to the extent that we have a little bit of bandwidth. I do think it would be helpful to understand a little bit more in depth, to know if there are other states that have additional information, such as Wyoming's, that could help inform those recommendations. I appreciate we don't need to be like, say, this is what we want, period. But to say suggestions from other states would include blah, 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 blah. Because I just think legislators are going to need that language to pursue, should they want to have legal changes, or even the State Department if they pursue a rule package on these things, right? That would be my only concern. It's just that level of recommendation.
Yeah, Jordan, I'm wondering if that's something that we can have like Brian almost do like a little bit of a interview with folks, and then we kind of respond via survey to folks around like what we would draw up and have. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, we can certainly reach out. Brian is out this week, so I would want to touch base with him on what contact he previously had with Wyoming. He might be further along than we even know on some of those questions.
Yeah.
If this subcommittee honestly is interested in scheduling a secondary meeting outside of the regular thing, that's probably, I'm going to suggest, the easiest thing. If we want to bring someone in to talk, that's probably the only way we're going to do it, is if we schedule a separate meeting for this specific subcommittee. And then we could try and get experts in and talk and go that way. So if this subcommittee would consider that before the next meeting on, right, give me 1 second. Our next meeting is May 1st. Brian and I could try and bust really quickly to see if we could get in touch with Wyoming and bring someone in to discuss this. If nothing else, we could try and schedule another meeting to pull every example we have here. We have Kansas, we have Vermont, we have Wyoming, and kind of do a more thoughtful analysis on that point. We could bring Texas back in. So if folks are amenable to another meeting, we could try and work it in that way.
I personally am. I'll just speak for myself. This is just such a long-standing issue, and I'm looking at Becky. But Becky, you and I have talked with providers about this for 5 years now. I mean, and we've made zero headway about closing the gap that I previously referenced. And so I don't want to lose an opportunity to narrow that gap, frankly.
And I agree, Stephanie. I would love to have another meeting and get some more voices at the table. I'm going to be with about 20 other states, CAFCA equivalent, the first week of May. And I would love, I will be able to do much more of a deep dive with a lot of colleagues and can probably bring more information after that too. So yeah, I would love another meeting if we could do that.
Well, maybe Becky, we could coordinate, and if this happens after May, when you gather that information, we can always, it doesn't make sense to have the meeting before we have all the information we want. Because I think another really useful thing, just listening to this and looking at the comments, would be, Becky, if we could get some guest speakers of providers in this state, outside of Brandon, who can come in and say, okay, this is where I'm lost. This is where I'm stuck. Like we actually need facilities to come in and give us that feedback. Do you think we could arrange that?
Absolutely, 200%.
And also regulators too. I mean, I am so intrigued again about the gap. I think Dennis's group, you know, would really, I think, provide an important counterbalance, right?
Yes.
Because there's a gap, friends. It is so wide and so deep that
Stephanie, can you clarify when you say the gap? Is it the gap, and what are you referencing? I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
literally this, at least what, and I call it folklore in deference to the State Department, right?
Okay.
I want to be clear. I don't know who says what or thinks what, honestly, but the folklore is the State Department says you can never touch a kid, that there is some magical AG opinion out there that has told them that you can never touch a child and they have rights. This broad 30,000-foot view statement. And the State Department, I have never heard anything deeper than that, but the law certainly says that's not true, right? And so you even have, you know, I think another person's comment on our survey who illustrated that there's been differing interpretations among regulators. And so that's the gap, is nobody, honestly, nobody has just sort of stood in the middle of the room and said, no, restraints are permissible. Here is the law. Now, we all may disagree on what a restraint is in a various context, but a restraint is possible. We aren't even there, Trace.
Mhm.
I know I'm getting kind of like riled up, but it's just fascinating to me more than anything. And again, I want to give deference to all sides of the conversation, because I call it folklore. I don't really know what people's positions are
Mhm.
and whether they're informed. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, where I'm just thinking from my perspective, it's like, okay, there's a clear opportunity then there on the where this directive is like, is it clear? It's like, you know, is the law clear? And it's like there might be an additional recommendation here around, yeah, maybe the law is clear, but it's not clear on right, like speaking to this gap specifically. So
Which is
I don't
where I
know.
get to the training issue, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, enough of me.
Renee, jump in.
Yeah, to your point, Stephanie, in the folklore issue. So I missed. I was in and out of the last meeting because I was double booked. So I'm not sure if this happened, but has this group invited the CDHS, the provider licensing unit, to state what their current actions are to inform this process? I mean, sorry, what the current stance is and how they regulate to it.
Yes, we did this roughly in March, on March 1 of last year. So it's been a year. I think it probably would be beneficial to refresh and regroup and make sure the presentation is through the lens, because the presentation was very broad. It went from everything from restraint to response to reporting. And I think if we could get this very, very narrow discussion on this is our interpretation, to Stephanie's point, I think that would be a nice refresher for the whole group.
Yeah, and I think thanks for reminding that they presented on. I don't think they went into great detail on in terms of how they actually interpret, or if maybe they didn't. I just don't remember. But it seems like we're talking about a gap. It would be important to kind of narrow in on where exactly that gap is. Like if this is how it's currently being acted on, but folks are finding it feels differently otherwise, or then that would be important to know. Or if the gap is in a different place, based on that.
Just thinking a little bit of planning, Trace, if you can just forgive me for a second. Renee, is that something maybe I could coordinate with you on going back and finding someone to come and present?
Dennis would be the best person because he's much closer to that actual work than I am, so he could get you connected quicker. I'd be happy to help, but he would be your more direct avenue. Does that work for you?
Yes, if I don't hear, I will.
Yeah, let me know if you need support on that.
I think a really important about that, Renee, a really important question or thing for us to hear would be how the regulation team, how the licensing and monitoring team is trained. I've never heard that in all of my 200 years doing this work. I don't have any idea how they're trained or what they're trained on or how it's measured or any of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So it sounds like we need another opportunity to bring folks back to the table to do some of the, now that we've kind of got the specific directive in front of us, to do some of the wrestling, to ask some of these questions, Renee, to your point, like making sure that we actually are clear on how folks currently see it, right? On the regulator side, and then kind of do some of this back and forth conversation. Okay, well, I think we've got, yeah, right? Yeah, you do look pretty good, Becky. Not bad, not bad.
Thanks, guys.
I want to flip us a little bit. Just I want to hear folks. Obviously, some of this work it's like a little bit of a cat and mouse thing where we can't do one until we do the other. But I want to go to the conversation. We've got about 20 minutes left. This conversation around the idea somewhere of this good faith clause, if you will, or something. I don't know what you would call it. It sounds like it's not, and I'm just saying broadly because I don't know, it sounds like it's not captured really anywhere other than like in our hearts. that this idea that, you know, the folks, the providers and whoever else, Becky, that you would reference, you know, making a call based on their expertise, their experience, you know, that sort of being spelled out specifically is nowhere, and it sounds like some folks are interested in that. I just want to open that up to the group of like, because I'm seeing that as a theme. Jenna, you brought it up originally, so let's start with the why, the folks that are in support of that, and then I'd be kind of curious if there's anyone that says, man, that is a terrible idea and here's why. You know, like, are there any other like kind of dissenting views on that? Just making sure that I'm opening it up to both sides of that. Dave, I'm seeing your head go in all different directions. So Dave,
You know, I don't have a dissenting view. I agree with it. In the reality common sense world, people with understanding and how things work in residential, and I mean, I get it. But a lot of people, I have a feeling there's a lot of people out there in the residential world when there's where everybody is very lawsuit happy, when anything possibly happens to a youth, around how staff have to make very quick impulsive decisions when they're reacting to a youth's behavior or something like that. And those are really easy to do, the Monday night quarterback and review that thing when we have all the time in the world to review it. I worry about I love good faith discretion based off of all our experiences, based off of assessments, based off our experiences with the youth. But I also I think there are some providers out there that would be, you know what? I'd rather take my chances and just let this youth run away, and I have no liability there, compared to actually putting my hands on them and then something happening. There's a lot more risk and liability there, than actually just letting them walk away. So I think things do need to be probably spelled out a little more in detail, or somehow reduce that liability.
yeah, I guess
That's just me I work in DYS, but my prior experience was community residential, and we see it in the news all the time. We always sit back and second guess everybody's decision when they're in the moment, in the heat of the moment, dealing with a situation. That's just the way of the world right now.
It is, and you're 200% accurate in saying that the staff are instructed, when in doubt, don't do anything. Just back off, and yeah.
I guess I see, Dave, and the comments I'm seeing in the note catchers, and then Jenna's. I mean, Jenna, you jump in if I'm interpreting this wrong, which is that this isn't like it. Obviously, you're never fully absolved from like any sort of like liability, but would something around a good faith effort be just an additional support to providers? That would be a welcomed support. Again, it's not like a perfect solution, but like that's like, it sounds like that it would just be like
I think it would help in many cases, but not 100%. I mean,
Sure.
nothing's 100%, but I think it would help in some of the lower risk situations where when I say put hands on, I'm not talking about wanting staff to go out and physically manage them down to the ground. Some of them just may be going to put your arm around their shoulder and walking them back to the facility and have a conversation. According to the law, that's still putting your hands on them. That's still restraining them, but that's not grappling them down to the ground. So yes, I agree with you. I think some of that would be very beneficial and would handle quite a few things, but not 100%.
Yeah. Is anything 100% ever?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Sorry, Stephanie. I think I cut you off.
No, I was gonna say, Stephanie, you jump in, and then Jenna.
Yeah, I think that so whenever you have like a good faith exception, right? Typically, this is what you hear in criminal law, right? Is that if in that case, if an officer had reasonable belief that they were acting pursuant to a good search warrant, right? They shall not be held liable for it not being a good search warrant, right? That's typically how you hear it. So in my mind, I'm trying to think of, okay, if a staff member acted in reasonably good faith, that they were acting in accordance with the law, right, or regulation, what? Right? There has to be a what. And so the question is, and to your point, Dave, you can't say shouldn't be liable. That would never, I mean, maybe that could be it, but nobody will ever support that, right? Especially with the proliferation of concerns about facilities and violence in facilities, et cetera. So, you know, what I think you almost end up with is this a part, Becky, of the regulatory framework, right? Going back to this notion of rules and regs, is that, you know, if a staff member is found to be acting in good faith and is documented, as Jenna has laid out, right? This shall be considered by licensing when determining whether to violate facilities, right? Because what I've always heard from facilities is that if you have one regulator, you could end up with 100 violations from an incident. And if you have another regulator, you could end up with a warning and nothing happens, right? And this all matters because people have contracts and people have invested money. And so how many violations you get on your license matters to people at the end of the day. So I'm wondering if this is where that comes more into play, which is, you know, when considering whether a facility is acted in with compliance, they ought to consider whether the staff member acted in good faith and conformity with the law. That's where I see that maybe coming into play.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of head nods. Would any, yeah.
Yeah, if I can say something, Stephanie, I'm glad you said that because I think that's where I was trying to come from too. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I really appreciate how you laid out law versus regulation. But the good faith gives the ability to give support to the staff that we trust you, because I can't imagine majority of staff like to put hands on kids. And so when they have to, it's because it's a really big need, right? And they are acting in good faith to keep that child safe. And then part of what I put in my note catcher for the, like maybe the policy piece would be there's a root cause analysis or a review of some sort that's put into policy after restraint happens to make sure that, you know, did they follow all the protocol? You know, what is determined good faith? So I think that's where I would see then we're still holding staff accountable and making sure that they're not just doing what they're doing. And then, you know, going back to some of Wyoming's pieces, did they, you know, take hands off when the child was in control and things like that. So I think there's that whole policy piece that would go in line with like, I think a lot of us are in agreement with this training. Like, what does that training look like? But I think that there has to be accountability and support for the staff, right? So both of those pieces. And then on the staff side too, they have to have really clear documentation, right? Like my mobile crisis team, for example, when they go and they put someone on in M1 hold, they have to have really clear documentation because we have to hold them accountable that they're going to make sure that they're doing the best for this client, right? And they're doing least restrictive level of care. I think it's a very similar in those pieces. So that's where I would say that policy would be really important.
Any other comments here? I think, Jordan, I feel like we have something to.
We have plenty, and just thinking out loud, and we've done this in the past where you can write a recommendation that the law should include, regulation should include documentation standards. Like, so just to put everyone's mind at ease, that's where you can do the and both, is you can get clarity in the law, and then you can give discretion to form regulations, how it's going to be best implemented, but you're just requiring what's in reg. So that's kind of a nice way we can work that in.
Yeah, Renee, does that not alleviate, but kind of, does that get at, what Jordan's just saying? Is that okay, yeah, I could potentially see myself living with that, or just kind of to your point around the law versus reg?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to stay pretty agnostic about where things should go, and just thinking through, I think it can probably work in multiple ways. I know it does work differently in other states who have equally vague laws, because again, this is a pretty standard medical psychiatric type standard until interpretation. So I'm trying to stay pretty agnostic. I also, that to me, figuring out exactly where the gap is, and looking at the avenues for addressing that. I think a lot of these suggestions could work. I don't know what I think about the good faith thing. I don't feel well enough informed to know legally how that actually impacts things. It was helpful for Stephanie to talk about that. But to me, it feels like this group can do a good service by really clarifying how things are perceived in the landscape, what are some of the concerns, what are some ways that other jurisdictions have solved it, and recommend that clarity needs to be reached through some process.
I appreciate that.
Clearly there's not, no pun intended, but clearly there's not clarity, and clearly there's a perceived problem, real, that then becomes a real problem, and it's impacting kids.
Yeah, appreciate that. It's helpful to understand too, the agnostic of the where. Dave, anything to jump in and add? I didn't know you were off mute. So.
No, I just put my comment in the chat. I mean,
Oh, I see. Yeah, it feels like a lot of times in these groups, I'll just say from an outside facilitation perspective, people are always calling to out how this impacts, folks on the ground and real life situation. That there's not always a clear translation there.
Yeah, and I think it's on so many pieces. That's why I threw out just we as stakeholders, all of us. I mean, we even have that within CDHS, like our compliance review teams that come in and audit, monitor our youth centers, and I'm sure the people that regulate with volume 7 going into private providers. I mean, sometimes we get very stuck in the black and white things that is written in the rule ourselves. And then even when we have a staff member telling us, well, this is what was going on, but it's we get stuck on, but this is the rule. And it's well, sometimes we get stuck on not being willing to go into that gray area and listen and try to understand ourselves.
It's all those lawyers, Dave.
Yeah.
Oh, you said it. I wasn't going to say it, but
that's why I say it. I'm probably one of the few that can and is willing to.
Yeah.
But we do it ourselves within our own systems. I mean, we like DYS, we do it to ourselves sometimes too.
Yeah, Dave's example about a staff putting an arm around a kid, or if it's even more aggressive, to move the kid out of the road or whatever. There is so much ambiguity and difference in opinion about even that I would love to have that conversation with licensing and monitoring and actual agency staff in the room, because so much folklore, as Stephanie says, would come out. It would be, you're not allowed to touch the kid. You should be able to touch the kid. I mean, it would be all over the place. And I think that would be a interesting conversation to have with those stakeholders.
So let's get to the planning piece, I think, because we've got a couple details to sort out here around these additional meetings and then who we want to hear from as well. I think, Jordan, one suggestion I was going to make was we're not ready to come to the full group yet with this, and I think that's okay. What we could do is in the next meeting use that time to continue to have one of these conversations. So we have the first half of the meeting hearing from the other group, assuming that they got somewhere where we can kind of like do the same work time with them. And then we let them go and we use the second half of that meeting with just this group to act, or we send them back into their room and they keep moving forward. So that is one meeting I think we could use. I don't know if you hate that idea, we can wrestle with that, but let's get to the.
I'm just worried about that's probably not enough time to have, just based on past experience. It sounds like at least 2 groups of speakers, providers, potentially.
No, I just mean as one of the meetings, like that we could use that time for like one of these is what I mean.
We definitely could. Yes, and then if we could just schedule something in May as a backup, that would be hugely helpful, and I'll just try to get everything in early as I can.
Yeah.
I'm worried about getting people actually on board by May 1, because it sounds like it's far away, but it's not, and I just think we might need more time to get everyone aligned for presentations.
Gotcha. So let's look at could folks bring up their May calendars, because we got a small and nimble group that's really kind of digging in on this, and we want to make sure that we can get folks there. Is that, Jordan, what do you think, like 2 hours?
I would at least do 2. If I can get people out sooner, I would. But we have one Wednesday, if folks want to keep on the Wednesday train, and that is Wednesday the 15th, when theoretically we could go to 8 to 10 again.
Does that work for folks? The 15th?
Works for me. I'm going to text Brandon and see if it works for him.
Renee, Dave, I saw Jenna, I saw your head, yes, but Renee, could y'all make that work?
What day was that again? The 15th?
The 15th from 8 to 10.
Is this a Zoom meeting? I don't know that it matters. Okay.
Yeah, we'll virtual again.
We're saying May 15th, right?
Yeah, that Wednesday.
Yeah. I'm good.
Okay.
Renee?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I actually have a high priority standing meeting every Wednesday morning that I get moved for these meetings, but I don't know that I can do that one, but I could try.
Well, the other thing, am I correct that this would be is this the meeting where we want to create a panel with, right? So Renee, that might not be as critical if we have CDHS licensing as part of this larger conversation.
That's true. I could certainly get the update. I could be there from 8 to 9. My standing meeting is 9 till.
Yeah, so I think that you may have a little bit of support just by virtue of the nature of the meeting.
Yeah. Just
Okay.
checking. Is that a meeting that Dennis would have to be to as well? Just checking, since.
Yeah, exactly.
Too great.
We need to pop over to see Dennis.
I know. Okay.
We need Dennis in a couple places at once.
Clown
Okay, well, so let's do that. And then I think, yeah, Renee, if that sounds good to you, since we'll have the CDHS kind of ongoing perspective, and then you'll join from 8 to 9, it sounds like.
And
Okay.
somebody will send out a meeting invite. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I'll have Addie do that today, just for this. That'll just be this group. And then we'll see what we can get in line for this next meeting. Jordan, I'm just thinking out loud. For the large group meeting, that maybe we still do some work time within this group if we can get folks there, and then we have that second meeting in May. So we have like maybe two more meetings to discuss.
Yes, I will try and get Wyoming for May 1st, ideally, so that that knowledge could come into the May 15th meeting.
Yeah.
If we need to do like a recorded interview session, we can always do that as well. And I'll let this group know to send me questions, thoughts, and maybe we could do a Zoom recording that people can watch at home. Just trying to get creative on how we can maybe make this happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and Becky, I was gonna say, yeah, or we could do the provider conversation on the first two. I don't know, Jordan, you and I can, we can sort out what order makes most sense.
Yeah, think that through and we can, I know they'll be very interested in being a part of that conversation. So I'm sure folks will try hard to get there.
Cool. All right, Jordan, from planning, anything else?
I don't think so. If anyone comes across other state language between now and then they would like us to include, let us know. Like I said, we did a pretty hard look, but we'll go through that lens. And if anyone has anything, and Renee, I think I'm asking that supports the current state position, please let us know. I'll work to incorporate that and send that out as soon as I can as well.
Great conversation, everybody.
Yeah, I was just gonna say thank y'all. It's really helpful to, I don't know. I love this group. It's like I love being able to wrestle with, the varying perspectives and just kind of the questions and it's just we knew that this would be a really rich discussion, this topic. And it proved us right that we need some more time.
I like the messy truth of it all.
Totally.
Because there's so many truths here, and the question is, how do you wade through that and make some sense out of it?
Yeah, and Renee, I appreciate, or go ahead, Dave.
No, I was just going to say I've enjoyed the discussion, just understanding that residential work is hard, and there are just so many things that impact. It's just hard, and bottom line is we want to keep kids safe, and that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, appreciate that, Dave. And Renee, I was just going to say I appreciate your push too of like making sure that we get the right. I mean, it's like the tension of like calling us back to the directive around the analysis piece and not selling ourselves short of our ability to do that with the perspectives we have present, and your call to kind of be like, there's more folks that need to be at the table, and so how can we like how can we either make a recommendation around that or bring them to the table now? So I think it's just a good call.
And I know it's always a struggle with things like this. You don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good, and
Totally,
like you said, have to be concrete and make decisions. But yeah, it's a complex issue, and a lot of steps to the process too.
Totally. Yep. All right. Looks like some folks are coming back from the other group. So y'all just hang tight. We'll get folks back in the next couple of minutes, and then we'll do Steve, were you looking to provide public comment today? No, you're cutting out. Maybe just drop in the chat what you're thinking and we can. Yes, please. Okay, perfect. We can't, just so you know, we can't hear you though. It sounds pretty muffled, at least on my end. Is everybody else? Okay, yeah, we can't hear you. So Steve, get that sorted, and we're gonna get the whole group back together, and then we'll provide the time for public comment. Just had a phone join 303. Who is that?
Lori Burney.
Okay, hey. All right, we're having Janelle. All right, looks like the other group folks are coming all back in. All right. Looks like we have everybody back. Justin, you had a good conversation, certainly good conversation on the prevention side. So appreciate folks digging in. We've got one member of the public so far that has requested public comment. So Steve Fisher, let's see if your audio is working, and then we'll give you 3 minutes and I'll jump in. Let me know, are you there? Let's test your audio out.
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Yes, yes, now it's working. All right, go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. Steve Fisher here. For those of you who don't know, I'm a civil engineer. I'm not in this child care system. My day job, civil engineer. I'm a board member of Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health Colorado chapter. And the reason I'm interested in this task force is because I've lived across the street from Tennyson Center since 1995. So I've seen hundreds of runs and rescues. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group. In the past 18 months, the task force has analyzed and debated effectively many facets of residential childcare and the risks of injury and death. I was reading the task force first year report and noticing perhaps a topic deserving some attention. It involves the idea of responsibility, coincidentally a topic of discussion in today's prevention subcommittee, which I was happy to listen into. For a moment, let's say that these are not new issues and that thousands of practitioners, parents, and other stakeholders have grappled with the same problems around the country for decades. So the question is, how do we expect a different outcome by studying, responding, mitigating in the same way as others have in the past? I think we could all agree that if we were to put ourselves in the shoes of a parent, such as those on this task force, we implicitly expect that a licensed institutional residential care facility would keep my child safe, perhaps even safer than at home. We know this is clearly not the case. And I would argue that laws and Volume 7 do not give enough responsibility and therefore liability to the residential care institutions. They do not act in loco parentis. They do not have enough skin in the game to prevent acts of omission, as the Institutional Abuse and Neglect laws put it. We license facilities where there is no real vetting or licensing needed for the staff that work there. Sure, they do have appropriate qualifications and professional backgrounds, educational qualifications, but no real liability. By comparison, let's look at some other professions like nursing, physical therapy, engineering. These practitioners hold state licenses, are held individually responsible, and their employer mitigates their risk with appropriate policies and procedures. Not so with the staff that we entrust kids to. There are lots of optional and allowed ways to keep kids safer at these facilities, but few ways to compel the facilities to do it. When things go terribly wrong by acts of omission, as in the case of Timothy, the only tool the state has is to inspect, fine, or swoop in and shut down a facility. I've been told many times from several administrations at one residential facility, a very effective justification for acts of omission, which is, we are not responsible. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate you being here as always. Appreciate your comments to the task force. Steve, can you also, I don't think I have your email. Can you drop in your email? You can just do it to a private chat just so we have it. I know that there's opportunities to continue to engage with you. Appreciate it, Steve. And if there are other members of the public present, I have not seen a request for public comment, but wanted to just ask one more time. Okay, great. All right, well, seeing no other comments, just again, appreciation for each of you. Sorry, appreciation for each of y'all. Stephanie, I want to just invite you in for any closing remarks, and we'll get out of here a little early.
Yeah, just thank you all. It's always a pleasure. And I always say this, but it's true. I'm always smarter when I leave here because of all of you. So thank you. And we look forward to carrying on.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much. And we will be in touch via email soon. Y'all take care.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.